This is episode number 93, and recently I've been receiving quite a few Facebook messages and emails from non-US based bartenders who are interested in coming to the United States to bartend. Unfortunately, I am not an expert on US immigration law, far from it, so I can't really help. But I do have a friend who is, and so today I thought I would invite him to come on the podcast and talk a little bit about what bartenders can do if they would like to come visit the United States and work as a bartender, or if they're interested in coming to the United States permanently. My friend's name is Mark Deal, and he's been working on the immigration industry for 8 years. He can be found on 2 podcasts on this ever-changing topic. He started the U.S. Immigration Podcast back in 2014 and has been the co-host of EB5 Investment Voice since 2015. He also told me his favorite mixed drinks can be found south of the border. I think he's trying to say he's a tequila man. I'm really excited to get his perspective because I think he can give us some really good advice on this very complicated topic. By the way, this podcast episode is sponsored by Q Drinks, a craft mixer company based out of New York. We're seeing a lot of great new craft mixers coming on the market recently, and I've been really impressed with the quality, carbonation level, and flavor profile of Q Drinks tonic, grapefruit, and ginger beer mixers, along with the rest of their portfolio. They're made with real, carefully chosen ingredients and designed to let you create a complete balanced cocktail with just their mixers and your spirit of choice. So thanks again to Q Drinks for supporting this podcast. Hey, Mark, thanks so much for joining us.
Hey, Julia. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, you bet. It's an interesting perspective to talk to somebody with experience in the immigration industry. Usually we're talking to bartenders and bar experts, so it's kind of fun to get some fresh blood from outside the industry.
Wow. Well, I'm glad that immigration is seen as fun.
Might be the first time you've heard that, I suppose.
Yeah, maybe once or twice, yeah.
That's good to hear. So before we get too far into this, I did want to start with one sort of preliminary question. That is, let's just get it out of the way. Are you an immigration lawyer?
You know, that's a great question. No, I'm not. And I'm glad that we got that done up front. I'm not an immigration attorney. I've been working in the immigration field for about 8 years. I've worked with hundreds of other immigration attorneys and thousands of foreign nationals. But my part's been mainly to align the business case and to make it more palatable for the immigration authorities. So in that, I've been working alongside immigration attorneys and foreign nationals. I've been doing that for, like I said, about 8 years. The last couple of years, I've been doing mainly legal marketing, especially for immigration attorneys. So I've become pretty well versed in all of the different immigration categories and visas and green cards and paths to citizenship. But yeah, as you said, I'm not an immigration attorney, so a lot of the examples that I may give, may not be applicable. Some might, but I would recommend somebody that when they hear this to think of something that, well, maybe that's what they want to talk with an immigration attorney about.
Sure, definitely. And I think the purpose of today's interview is really to just get a preliminary understanding of what the immigration landscape looks like for a bartender, and not necessarily, of course, to give everyone the exact details of their paperwork.
Well, that's what I do best. So let's dive into
it. Excellent. So the reason that I wanted to bring you on the call, to bring you on this podcast, was because I've been receiving several messages lately from folks who are bartenders, who are skilled bartenders outside the United States, and they're interested in coming to work here. And I don't know what to tell them, and I certainly don't want to lead them astray. So that's what made me think of you. So at a very high level, I know this is probably a huge question, but if you're speaking with a bartender from outside the United States and they would like to come work in the United States, what are their options?
You're right in first acknowledging this is a huge topic because there are a number of different options, and many of those may not apply to a specific individual because individuals are individuals and their cases, vary between each other. But I'm glad that we've narrowed it down to just bartenders because that gives us, somewhat of a focus. And I can say, from the get-go, it's going to be a little tough. There's a couple of big routes that they could go. One, they could start their own bar or restaurant, and there's immigration visa and green card processes for that if they want to open up a bar or restaurant with a bar. Of course, along that comes with everything that goes along with, starting your own business, as well as having the upfront capital to actually do that. And there's even some, restrictions on what foreign nationals from what countries can do and what programs would apply to them. So that's one way to come over and start their own. The other one that they may be thinking of is like, well, I'm a skilled bartender, and I would like to get a job at an existing bar in the United States. How do I go about doing that? And again, that can be tough because there is no direct visa program that would apply to essentially to bartenders. A lot of the visa programs are structured around what people in the immigration services and the government are structuring of, who they want in the country and what they want these people to do. And a lot of those visa programs are around like highly skilled jobs, or what they call highly skilled, and they're looking for people with like PhDs or master's degrees or bachelor's degrees in those fields that they want to work in. So the way that they've already positioned the language, it kind of shuts the bartenders out.
Yeah, so even though it is, in our opinion, a highly skilled profession, it may not be to the letter of what the actual government is calling a highly skilled profession.
Exactly. Because they'll lay out a few criteria. A highly skilled person would be, this, and this, and have all these, educations and degrees and certifications, or, exceptional awards, at national levels type thing that may not apply to a bartender. So the typical work visa program may not apply to them. But there's still other routes that they could go. There's a employment green card process. It's a lot longer than the visa process, but it could be applicable.
That's good to hear. And one thing that I have wondered about is there are a lot of large hospitality organizations that span the globe, things like Ramada and Marriott and, large hotel chains that have bars all over the United States. Excuse me, all over the globe, I should say. And I wonder, is there, if you were to start working locally for a large global corporation, is that a path that might work?
Oh my goodness. Yes, that certainly is a path. I'm glad you brought that up. There is an L1 visa path. So that would allow you to work at a company that has a foreign office somewhere. Let's say you work there for at least a year, and you're either a manager or executive or a highly skilled person. And I'm really going to extrapolate from the law on this one. But let's say they have a sub-program called L1B, and it's very specialized. So if you're seeking an immigration attorney for this, make sure that they have experience with the L1B process for this particular situation. And what they could do is they could frame the individual as a highly specialized individual for that company. Perhaps that company has a very complex menu or drinks that they've crafted themselves, and honestly, they just can't take a person off the streets in the United States and put them in that role. So this person could come over to either do that job or train the people here domestically on how it's done. So I'm glad you brought that up. Yeah, there's actually a visa program for that. It's called the L1B.
Interesting. So that might actually be a pretty decent path. Of course, the key there is going to be making sure that you have some sort of really highly specialized skill set. So when you're starting to work domestically in your home country, to really think about working into a specialized, maybe a mixologist role where you've got the skills to do the tinctures and the shrubs and the advanced ingredients that you could then come to the United States and teach to folks locally.
Exactly. And then when you're working with, say, an immigration attorney or like a business immigration consultant, like I used to be, they can actually take that and frame it in a way that's extremely palatable for the immigration authorities. So there's no question in their mind that that person is a specialized knowledge worker. In fact, that's what it's called, specialized knowledge worker visa.
Oh, perfect. That's really good to hear. So let's go back up a little bit and say that we're looking for something a little bit more short term. Let's say I don't know I'm going to like it in the United States, for example. Can you just come for a visit? Say like, oh, I'm just going to visit the United States for I don't know, 2 to 4 weeks. And while I'm there, I'm going to walk into a bar and offer to work. Is that allowed?
I'll say for the most part, no. There's two big visitor visa programs. They're, basically traveling for business or pleasure. And the business visa is really to go in and do small amounts of work, but something that is already aligned with what you're doing. So if you're say bar in another country is sending you here to perhaps work at a domestic bar here and perhaps show them how to do some of these drinks, you could do something like that. Or to say you're coming over to research buying a restaurant or something to that nature, but that doesn't really allow you to work in another bar. So for the most part, no, it would be tough. I mean, you could do it if you had, I would say your company is sending you to the United States to say, hey, go work at this bar, show them how to make, XYZ drinks, or hold this special event that's promoting our foreign brand or international brand, something along those lines. But there's nothing that would allow somebody that isn't covered by that a company or something like that to say, hey, I'm going to come in and do this. Perhaps if they have their own consultant company overseas, they could structure something like that, much like foreign nationals come over in the United States all the time to give speeches at various conferences. They get paid and reimbursed for that, but they're not working here permanently. Again,
that's a good point.
The rules vary.
Yeah, because there are definitely some big conferences that happen in the United States. The ones that come to mind for me are, primarily the Tales of the Cocktail, which is in New Orleans every year. And it's a massive conference for craft bartenders. And so I think if I understand you correctly, you could certainly come to the U.S. to speak at a conference like that, and you could be compensated for speaking at that conference, but you still probably couldn't walk across the street and start slinging cocktails.
No, that person, that speaker could not, but it also shows the motivation behind immigration services. They're not saying that, look, we don't want to shut out everyone outside the United States from coming over here for a short period of time and sharing their experience and their knowledge with the people that are here in the United States. So there are pathways to do that. So the example that we gave was somebody speaking at a conference, or the example could be that I'm traveling to the United States to work at this restaurant or bar for a few weeks to show them how to do X, Y, Z. And that's the extent of your business visa, your visitor business visa.
Sure, yeah. So I'm going to ask another question, which might be a little bit outside the box, but the main way that bartenders get compensated in the United States is actually not wages, it's actually tips. And I wonder if that creates a gray area. Or imagine, I was to be panhandling, for example, and to receive money from a passerby. I wouldn't consider that an occupation. And perhaps I should be careful talking about that as a similar case to bartending. But when you're receiving tips from a person and not a corporation, does that change anything as far as, calling it a job or versus calling it, a hobby?
I really don't have an answer for that one. I mean, I would think that, and again, this is just my gut, not going off of any rules that I know about. But say if anyone were to come over here, just as if I were to go over to a foreign nation, and someone were to give me money for no reason, I guess I could accept it. I'm not really sure if I'm answering your question, so maybe we could help refine it a little bit more together.
Sure. I guess what I'm asking is, when you receive money as wages, you receive it from a company, versus when you receive money as tips, you're receiving it from your customer. And it sometimes, it should be entered into the company, the bar's POS system, but it isn't always. For example, a tip jar in a coffee shop. Now, obviously, if things aren't written down, they're not tracked, and perhaps that might be hard for the government to find out about. But is it allowed technically for you to receive tips from customers if, say, you were doing a guest shift at a bar and you're not receiving any pay from the bar itself, but you do receive tips from the people you serve?
I honestly don't know. I don't know if there's any regulations that specifically point to that. I would think that if it's something that's customary for a domestic worker, that a foreign national worker, as long as they're working legally, could do the same, as long as they claim it, going across borders. And again, I'm really extrapolating there. I'm not sure.
Yeah, this is pretty specific to our industry, and probably not something you come across very often with, engineers and architects and that sort of person.
I get surprised every day. And now you've surprised me.
Oh, good. Do I get points for questions?
Sure, why not?
Oh, dear. So I did want to ask one specific question that's actually about India specifically, because I've received several messages from readers and listeners in India who are looking to come to the United States. Are there any rules that are specific to immigrating from India to the United States?
There are, and specifically, it's not so much rules for India, but rules that would apply to countries that aren't India or a handful of others. For example, the treaty trader visa. We don't have a treaty with India, much like we don't have a treaty with China and a handful of other nations that allow them to come into the U.S. to start a business or a trade venture. Specifically, that would be the E1 or the E2 program. They can't do. So, for example, if they wanted to start a small restaurant, for example, somebody from Australia or another country, they would be able to use essentially start up a small bar or restaurant, but somebody from India as well as China and a handful of other countries, that program wouldn't apply to them, so they would have to go look at another program that's significantly more expensive.
I see.
Yeah.
So it's not that there are rules specific to India, it's that there are some other countries that are actually a bit easier because they have special rules that apply to them. Correct.
There's also different retrogression issues where the United States wants a diverse population of immigrants. And if we have a lot of people from one nation applying for the same program, sometimes they can get shut out. And so that may also apply as well.
I see. So it might just be a sheer volume issue. If there's a lot of other folks from your country trying to get to the U.S., it might be more challenging.
Exactly. From one country under one particular visa program, there may be some caps involved.
Got it. So I'm really glad I brought you on this call, because this is so much more complicated than I had even begun to think about.
Well, I loved your question, because the dialogue allowed us to both discover that, perhaps the L1B visa would be an avenue, which I hadn't thought about before until you phrased a question the way you had, which is why you want to have a discussion with somebody such as an immigration attorney about your situation and things you could do, because shows like this, although they give you a broad overview of what may happen, individual cases are different, and sometimes you may find something.
Yeah, definitely. And actually, I did think of just one more question. I'm trying to think of the occupations that bartenders might sort of grow into to try to improve their positioning for immigration. And the other occupations that you sometimes see bartenders grow their career into include things like you mentioned, individual consulting, which may be consulting with a brand, like for example, working with a tequila company to create cocktails, or to work at one of their events. That's something that is definitely more on in my opinion, it's something that you could make a case is a higher skilled occupation, a higher skilled role. And similarly, somebody could start to actually work for one of those spirits companies, either as a brand ambassador or as a sales representative. And in those cases, I think you already mentioned the fact that if you have a skill, if you can make a case that you have something truly exceptional, you're building a much better case for immigration. But is there ever a situation where you might actually persuade your employer to sponsor you? And how does that work?
Well, that's another good question. Typically, you'll see employers that sponsor and bring in foreign nationals to do a particular job, and they have to go through the process and the wait times. And unfortunately, with the the phrasing of some of what Immigration Services calls a highly skilled person, somebody with a PhD, master's degree, or bachelor's degree in an occupation that's aligned to that and the work experience that would come to that. Some of those visa programs would not work, but they could sponsor you for an employment green card, but again, would take much longer.
Sure. And it's I can only imagine it's expensive.
Right. Expensive. So essentially that company would really have to want you and are willing to wait, and you be willing to wait for that process to work itself out.
Dare I ask how long these often take?
I asked a few immigration attorneys before this interview to get a little bit of background on the unique questions and concerns that your audience may have. And I just got a few eye rolls, and it's like, it's just going to be challenging. Exactly, like at least 12 months, something like that. So it could be long. There's different bulletins that U.S. Immigration Services posts up for different wait times. So that could be a good question to ask somebody when you're looking at the particular time that you want to apply for it. But it's certainly not quick. We're not talking days or weeks. So one of the things Immigration Services, especially in the United States, is very slow.
Sure. Yeah, I can only imagine. So it sounds like, to just kind of wrap up our conversation, if a bartender is looking to make their way eventually to the United States, I think maybe the first thing to say is to be patient, because it may not only the time it takes to process the paperwork, but it might take some time to develop the skills that will give you a really good case for immigration to the United States. And if you're looking at doing that, go ahead and have a conversation with an immigration lawyer, because they're probably going to help you. They might even help you with some of your career planning to say, well, go in this direction, learn these skills, and then we've got a really good case, versus if you go in another direction, perhaps it's not as strong of a case to get you in the country. Is that a fair statement?
I would say so. Be patient, and I would add on to it to be creative, because if you can do it in such a way that it seems more unique, then you become a more unique person, and not just one of a stack of 100 or perhaps thousands that want to do the exact same thing. So perhaps it's taking what you do and phrasing it in a more creative way, or perhaps it's a actual way of looking at what you do and being a little bit more creative about it, such as being a bartender consultant vice just a bartender, and that could open up another world of possibilities and make different programs more accessible.
Excellent. Well, thank you. I really appreciate you coming on this call. I know this is probably a question you don't get very often, so I appreciate your expertise.
Thank you so much for having me on.
Yeah, and if folks want to learn more about this process, definitely they should speak with an immigration lawyer. I know you have a podcast of your own, correct?
I've got a couple podcasts on immigration. Yeah.
So where should people go to learn a little bit more about this topic?
For this specific topic, I would check out my show, U.S. Immigration Podcast, and we dive into various elements of immigration, different visas and different green card processes, and talk with a number of different attorneys. That might be one good spot to go and listen to. So that'd be U.S. Immigration Podcast.
Excellent. Well, once again, I really appreciate you coming on the call. And anybody who is thinking about immigrating to the United States, I know I would love to have you over here. So I do wish you the best of luck. And of course, I do want to say one thing. Neither Mark nor myself are lawyers. And so we are not giving legal advice, but we do absolutely encourage you to go and get some great legal advice from an immigration lawyer. And actually, one more question for you, Mark. Where can people find a good immigration lawyer?
Ooh, wasn't really ready for that one. Surprise. Well, I'd say one good place to start would be the American Immigration Lawyers Association website.
Perfect. Great. Well, I'll go ahead and include a link to that in the show notes then. So head on over to the show notes at mixologytalk.com/93. And we'll include all these notes, and we'll include the links to Mark's podcast and to the association you just mentioned. Thank you so much, Mark.
Thank you, Julia.
Thank you so much to Mark for joining us. And I have to mention, this conversation with Mark was actually recorded in early January 2017. And already it seems like the world of immigration law has changed so quickly. It's just like Mark says, things are changing all the time, and it's really important to speak with a lawyer because they're going to have a good sense for what's happening right now and what's going to work for you. So if you'd like to hear more of Mark, head on over to the U.S. Immigration Podcast, or you can always just check out the show notes at mixologytalk.com/93. We'll have all the resources and links that we discussed today. Catch you in a couple weeks. Cheers. Never miss an episode by subscribing in iTunes or YouTube. And as always, check out the show notes by clicking on the right.